The starlit void stretched out in every direction, silent and mesmerizing, as the ISV Resolution drifted along the edges of charted space. Colonel Astrid Nova stood at the forward observation window, her eyes tracing the faint glimmer of distant stars. The hum of the ship's engines pulsed beneath her feet. She was a woman who had seen enough conflict to value caution, yet her heart had never fully hardened to the suffering of others. Even after the heavy losses in previous skirmishes, she held onto a sense of duty that went beyond Earth's political caution. In times of crisis, doing what was right mattered more than following old directives. Her second-in-command was Science Officer Iden Fox, a young man whose curiosity and idealism flared like cosmic fire in his bright green eyes. He often told Astrid that humanity had retreated into itself for too long, that Earth's decision to play it safe would one day cost them more than the Senate would ever admit. Astrid sometimes listened without replying, allowing him to voice his frustrations. She recognized the same spirit in him that she once saw in the mirror, a yearning to engage with the galaxy, to protect lives that might otherwise vanish in the cosmic darkness. Tonight, the sense of routine silence on the bridge was broken by a sudden ping from comms officer Lena Roll. A soft-spoken but highly skilled technician, Lena had a knack for catching signals that most systems missed. She leaned forward, flicking through multiple channels until she isolated a distress call, crackling on an unusual frequency. Astrid turned her head at the subdued alarm in Lena's voice. Something about the faint stuttering static sounded like an urgent SOS, a plea in a language not commonly used in Earth's allied networks. She approached Lena's station. "What do we have?" Lena's fingers flew across the console, adjusting the filters until the words surfaced through the noise. The language was foreign, but the universal translator caught enough fragments to form a coherent message. "We are under attack. They're killing us. Please help." A shiver of discomfort spread through the bridge. Earth's official stance had been to avoid entangling alliances beyond their protected trade routes. Colonel Astrid Nova knew the protocols by heart. Any interference in off-limits sectors required direct authorization from EarthGov, which in turn needed the Senate's nod, an excruciatingly slow chain of bureaucracy. But the voice in that distress call lingered in her mind. They were running out of time. She straightened. Distance to the source. Lena checked. 2.7 AUs from our current position. Not in Earth's official territory. It's borderline neutral space. Iden, standing nearby, shook his head. "That's close enough. We can at least investigate." Silence swelled in the room, carrying the weight of unspoken consequences. Astrid was aware that interfering would likely spark political backlash, especially if the aggressors turned out to be a formidable power. But every instinct told her that ignoring this call could mean leaving innocents to die. She turned to Iden, then to Lena. "Set a course. We'll see what we can do without compromising the Resolution's safety. If we confirm active combat or an ongoing slaughter, we'll do what we must." No one on the bridge objected. The engines rumbled to life, and the ISV Resolution changed trajectory. They slipped deeper into the star-dappled darkness, charting a path that EarthGov would not have approved had they known. For Astrid, the moral choice was clear. She would rather face bureaucratic fury later than suffer the guilt of inaction now. Hours later, they arrived near the source. The first sight that greeted them was haunting, twisted hull fragments drifting between chunks of a destroyed transport vessel. Some pieces still glowed with the faint embers of energy surges. The remains of an alien craft spun quietly, an unspeakable testament to a brutal assault. Astrid ordered the main lights dimmed to keep their signature low. She scanned for life signs with a cautious hope that maybe they had arrived in time. The sensor feed flared. Lena read out partial hits, a handful of faint life signals clinging to what looked like a battered landing craft. Astrid immediately dispatched a small rescue team in a shuttle, carefully maneuvering through the debris field. They found the inside of the crippled vessel strewn with debris and flickering overhead lights. Iden accompanied the rescue detail, feeling his heart pound with nervous anticipation. Within the cramped corridors, the team discovered alien survivors huddled behind fallen crates. They were of a slender, pale-skinned species with large, sorrowful eyes. Hestara. Iden realized, though he had never seen them in person. They flinched at the sight of humans in their battered, soot-stained uniforms. Several were injured. Some had already died, their bodies lying limp among the wreckage. A trembling hush hung in the stale air. Iden lifted his hands in a gesture of peace. "We're here to help." One of the Hestara, a female with a softly glowing ridge across her forehead, gazed at him with equal parts desperation and disbelief. She spoke in halting Universal Basic, explaining that their convoy had been attacked by an empire calling itself the Varen Dominion. The Hestara had tried reaching out to any friendly station or patrol. Over and over they had cried out for help, and each time, no one answered, until now. When Iden and the rescue team escorted them back to the shuttle, the Hestara's wide eyes flickered with relief for the first time. Several collapsed in his seats, exhausted. Others clutched the hands of fallen friends. The moment the shuttle lifted off to return to the ISV Resolution, Iden realized there was no turning back. They had effectively broken the rules by intervening, but letting these people die was unthinkable. Colonel Astrid Nova stood in the hangar bay as the shuttle docked. She saw how the Hestara leaned on one another for support, how some carried children, tiny versions of their race, with the same luminous markings. It struck Astrid like a blade to the heart. The wariness in her soul turned into steely resolve. If the Varen Dominion was systematically wiping out entire populations, then Earth had to know. If Earth chose not to react, Astrid would push them to do so. Over the next few hours, the medical staff tended the injured Hestara with what supplies they had. Iden interviewed a survivor named Errol, who seemed to have some leadership role among them. Errol described large, wedge-shaped warships bearing the Dominion sigil, a black crest shaped like twin horns. They had blocked the Hestara convoy's main route and opened fire without warning. He recounted chilling stories. Entire outposts razed to dust, populations forced into slave labor or lined up and executed. His voice cracked when mentioning that many of his kind had believed the rest of the galaxy would intervene, but help never arrived. The mood aboard the ISV Resolution grew somber. Some officers worried what would happen if these Varen ships tracked them. The Resolution was not a dreadnought. It was an exploratory patrol vessel with moderate armaments. Astrid weighed the moral imperative against the threat. Ultimately, she ordered the wounded Hestara given quarters, or at least bed space in the infirmary, and she informed them that Earth would do its best to protect them. She prayed that EarthGov would see reason once they received the distress data. The Colonel's next move was to send a direct, high-priority message to Earth. The content included the Hestara testimony, sensor readings from the wreckage, and recordings of the distress calls. She also included her personal plea. This must not be ignored. Humanity's presence is needed. These people have nowhere else to turn. On Earth, thousands of light years away, the halls of EarthGov resonated with politics. Chancellor Avel Young had grown weary of the Senate's constant caution. In the last decade, Earth had tried to rebuild after the traumatic Orion Rift War, pulling back from external conflicts. The official stance was, let the galaxy settle its own disputes. But the reports from the ISV Resolution shook her. She stood in the circular briefing room, eyes fixed on the horrifying images of Hestara children, burned-out ships, and convoys torn apart. This was not a mere territorial skirmish. This was genocide in the making. As the Senate convened in a tension-laden session, Chancellor Liang rose to speak. She presented the data, citing moral responsibilities. Some senators balked, pointing out that Earth's economy and defense might not withstand another large-scale conflict. Others murmured that if they intervened once, the requests for help would never end. Liang's gaze traveled the chamber. She recognized all the old fears, but she also sensed something shifting beyond those marble walls. The images of the Hestara survivors spread across the public infosphere, going viral within hours. The universal translator rendered their pleas in every major Earth language. Ordinary people felt the raw anguish in those words. Social media networks lit up with outrage. Hashtag answer the call. Hashtag we cannot ignore. Veterans groups posted messages of willingness to return to service if Earth stepped forward. Civilian relief organizations demanded immediate action. The wave of moral sentiment crashed against the Senate's timidity, and it began to crack that fragile wall of political inertia. Liang saw her opportunity. With or without unanimous support, she declared a provisional deployment. She appointed Admiral Darius Aureli to assemble a recon fleet and travel to the fringes of Dominion space, gather further intelligence, and, if necessary, protect any refugees threatened by the Varen. The Senate might scream for her resignation, but the public demanded that someone take responsibility. She was willing to bear the cost. Word of Earth's shift spread among the lesser-known corners of the galaxy. Some alien ambassadors watched with a mix of relief and wariness. Humanity, once known for its fierce ingenuity, had chosen to step away from the galactic spotlight years ago, but there was no doubt of their capabilities when truly roused. Now, it seemed, they were coming back, spurred by the echo of terrified voices that no one else answered. Colonel Astrid Nova received an official communiqué from Chancellor Liang. Support is on its way. It said, stay the course, gather intelligence, and stand by for reinforcement. In the same breath, the message acknowledged that bureaucracy could still hamper them, but the gist was clear. Earth would no longer ignore this. Astrid, reading those lines, felt an odd combination of relief and apprehension. She gazed through the ship's main viewport, as if trying to see the oncoming war that lay hidden in starlit silence. She convened a meeting with her senior staff. Aiden sat forward eagerly, wanting to spearhead any scouting operation that would expose the Dominion's atrocities. Lena provided updated readings of suspected Dominion movements, gleaned from the refugees' partial star charts. The data pointed to multiple strongholds across the Neres sector and beyond, each rumored to be a place where entire populations vanished. Some had never even appeared on official maps. The possibility that the Dominion was quietly carving out a genocidal empire made Astrid's blood run cold. In the following days, the ISV Resolution ventured deeper into neutral territory. Along the way, they discovered more signs of devastation. Outposts left in ruins, a few drifting escape pods with no survivors inside. The Hestara passengers grew visibly distressed with every new finding, as though witnessing a pattern that mirrored their own suffering. Astrid made sure they were treated kindly by the crew. She also asked them to share everything they knew about the Dominion's hierarchy. The name that emerged repeatedly was the same, Varen Dominion. The symbol was always that black crest. The rumored commander, High Regent Sadhan, said to be obsessed with forging a pure empire by eradicating lesser species. One dawn shift, the sensors picked up a large Dominion cruiser patrolling a region known as Neres 4. Astrid had to decide whether to avoid detection or to observe. She opted for caution, but a mistake in the Resolution's stealth approach led to a sensor ping from the Dominion cruiser. The Dominion ship began an aggressive pursuit. Astrid ordered a retreat jump, stifling frustration at not having more intel. Still, the moment left an undeniable impression. These Dominion forces were well-equipped and unafraid to engage intruders. When Admiral Aureli's recon fleet finally arrived at Astrid coordinates, the colonel felt some measure of validation. The Earth warships looked formidable, bristling with coil cannons, missile arrays, and advanced shielding. The flagship, ESS Oppenheimer, had hull plating that reflected starlight in a brilliant array. Over subspace comms, Aureli's crisp voice declared Earth's readiness to uncover the truth about the Dominion. And if that truth demanded action, they would oblige. The combined group soon discovered a communications outpost that the Dominion used to route signals across their local conquests. If they could seize that outpost, they might confirm rumors of mass imprisonment, extermination sites, or re-education camps. Admiral Aureli decided on a strike. He would lure away the main Dominion garrison while the ISV Resolution and a few smaller destroyers launched a precise incursion. The plan promised minimal casualties if timed perfectly. Just before the operation, Astrid addressed her crew. She reminded them of why they had come so far, ignoring the old policy of non-involvement. "We do this," she said, "because no one else dared. We answer their call, because doing nothing is the same as condoning murder." Her words kindled a quiet fire among the officers and enlisted ranks. Aiden in particular stood at attention, his eyes gleaming with a sense of purpose. The strike unfolded with nerve-wracking precision. Aureli's vessels baited the Dominion cruisers away, launching decoy drones to simulate larger targets. Meanwhile, the Resolution and 2 destroyers performed micro-jumps into the outpost perimeter. They disabled the station's external turrets through synchronized missile salvos. Damage rippled along the station's hull, causing power fluctuations that gave Astrid's boarding team a narrow window to breach. The boarding party advanced through flickering corridors, battling pockets of Dominion soldiers armed with plasma rifles. Fierce skirmishes lit the corridors with red and blue muzzle flashes. Aiden led a small squad that shut down the station's central antenna array. As they moved deeper, they found cells lined with victims from various species, Hestara, Dreen, Aurelian, and more. Most cowered in fear, not sure if these new arrivals were friend or foe. But as soon as the humans identified themselves, relief broke over the prisoners' faces like dawnlight. When the cell doors opened, the rescued captives stumbled out, blinking away tears. They described atrocities the Dominion had committed, the same cruelty Errol had recounted. One Dreen prisoner, his scaled skin peeling from torture, whispered that the Dominion was building up a dreaded force known as the Black Lance. Rumor said it was either a superweapon or an elite fleet, unstoppable in pitched battles. Dominion propaganda bragged that the Black Lance would enforce the new cosmic order. When Aiden relayed this over comms, Astrid felt a knot tighten in her stomach. This was clearly bigger than sporadic raids. The Dominion had an agenda for large-scale expansion via terror and annihilation. They succeeded in extracting data from the station's computers, capturing logs of prisoner transports, purge campaigns, and supply lines. The operation was a triumph, but it came at the cost of several human lives lost in the firefight. In a final push, they rigged charges to destroy the station after ensuring all prisoners were evacuated. As the ships pulled away, the structure was consumed by a bright explosion, a minor but critical setback for the Dominion. Fresh from that success, the combined Earth Task Force moved to a staging area called the Charred Axis, a region known for its dangerous gravity anomalies. Intelligence reports suggested the Dominion had concentrated thousands of captives there, held in orbital stations that doubled as extermination sites. If any place could confirm the scope of the genocide, it was the Charred Axis. During the approach, the tension on board the Resolution soared. Will they find a mass grave in progress, or possibly a chance to intervene in time? While the crew braced for the worst, the newly freed refugees expressed a flicker of hope. They saw the humans and their allies were willing to fight back, and that realization seemed to mend a piece of their broken spirits. Admiral Aureli's voice resonated through the fleet comm channels. "We will split into 2 prongs. My group draws their main force. Colonel Nova's group will pinpoint the station that coordinates the entire orbital defense. Once we knock that out, we can free the captives." Astrid agreed, albeit nervously. The plan mirrored the earlier strike, but the stakes were far higher. The presence of the rumored Black Lance hung over their heads like a storm cloud. No one was entirely sure if the Dominion's elite force would appear, but the possibility made everyone uneasy. The Charred Axis lived up to its foreboding name. Asteroids tumbled in disjointed orbits, some superheated by gravitational friction. The space was thick with swirling debris, shadows drifting ominously in the gloom. Red sensor beacons from the Dominion's perimeter blinked like predatory eyes. Astrid guided the Resolution in a wide arc, scanning for any sign of the central station. Moments later, they found it, a massive ring-like structure with energy filaments bridging sections of its hull. Preliminary scans showed it housed thousands of life forms, likely prisoners. An entire sphere of Dominion ships patrolled around it in precise, deadly orbits. Astrid swallowed hard. The combined Earth force was outnumbered. But if they waited for more reinforcements, thousands could die in some cleansing order. Admiral Aureli's prong launched a large-scale feint, drawing many Dominion cruisers away. Meanwhile, the Resolution and a handful of lighter warships sneaked in. In the gloom, it was easy to hide among swirling asteroids, but the slightest sensor slip might alert the station. They closed in. The first stage involved planting shield disruptor drones near the station's outer ring. Astrid held her breath as Aiden orchestrated the maneuver from the ops console. The drones latched onto key shield nodes, injecting them with virus-coated pulses to create a microgap. For a moment, everything seemed to go well. Then an alarm blared on the bridge. Dominion picket ships had spotted them. In that tense moment, the entire operation nearly fell apart. 2 Dominion interceptors roared in, firing plasma bolts that rocked the Resolution's hull. Astrid barked orders to return fire, sending tungsten slugs slicing through the void. One interceptor exploded in a silent bloom of flame, while the second spun away, trailing debris. But the station had been alerted. Turrets across the ring pivoted and unleashed a torrent of energy, forcing the Earth's ships to scatter. The shield disruptors were only partially installed. Astrid realized they had seconds at best to break through. She gave the command, and the small flotilla punched forward, braving the storm of fire. The Resolution's forward plating glowed, absorbing repeated impacts. One Allied destroyer took a direct hit to its engine block and spun out of control, half the ship wreathed in flames. In the midst of this chaos, Aiden triggered the disruptor drones. Like a lock undone by multiple keys, the station's external shielding flickered, then dropped in a few arcs. Astrid seized the opening. Missiles streaked in, slamming into the ring's weapon platforms. Explosions rippled along the structure, dimming its defensive grid. Now the battered Earth ships swooped in. Boarding craft launched, intent on reaching the detention cells. Astrid stayed on the bridge, coordinating the assault. Her heart hammered as she recalled the scenes from the last outpost. She feared finding only corpses. But if even one life could be saved, it was worth the risk. Fighting raged in the ring's corridors. Dominion troopers, fanatical in their loyalty, fired relentlessly. The humans fought with disciplined tenacity, clearing one block of cells after another. Freed prisoners spilled into the passageways, some weeping, some shouting warnings about further horrors. The ring's central control nexus was heavily guarded, but eventually Earth's Marines overran it. They took down the Dominion officer in charge, a sneering figure who spat curses at them even as he bled out. What they discovered in the station's core was worse than anticipated. Chambers rigged with lethal gas dispensers, as if the Dominion intended to systematically execute the captives if threatened. Thousands were only minutes from a forced demise. The shockwaves of that revelation galvanized the humans and their alien allies to push harder. They overloaded the ring's mainframe, disabling the kill protocols. It was at once a rescue and a condemnation of the Dominion's cruelty. Alarms shrieked. Astrid learned from ground reports that waves of Dominion reinforcements were inbound. The plan had been to punch in, free as many as possible, and escape. But the Dominion's response was faster than expected. Every alarm on the ring lit up. The defenders began setting charges to destroy the entire structure if they lost it. Astrid's eyes darted across sensor feeds, her voice tight with urgency as she commanded the fleet to prepare immediate evacuations. The ring was about to become a colossal grave if they failed to retreat swiftly. Amid the chaos, a ragged cheer arose from the rescue teams as the final group of freed prisoners boarded Allied craft. It was time to extract. The Dominion ships soared in, exchanging punishing fire with Admiral Aureli's group, which had rushed to support them. The ring buckled in multiple places. Explosions tore through the hull. The Earth ships fled with the rescued, weaving between bursts of plasma. One by one, battered vessels jumped away, some belching smoke into vacuum. The ring collapsed on itself in a cataclysmic blast, scarring the sector with its fiery demise. Yet thousands of prisoners had escaped that night. They regrouped in a safer corridor of space. The final tally of lives rescued was staggering, but so too were the casualties. The cost was heavy. Some hulls were so damaged they might never fight again. Men and women who had volunteered for the mission lay in the infirmaries or in body bags. As Astrid walked through the corridors of the Resolution, hearing the quiet sobs of newly freed families and the muffled cursing of injured Marines, she felt both pride and grief. Moments after this partial victory, the sensors detected a massive quantum surge, the arrival of an entire Dominion war group. At its center were behemoth vessels brandishing black, serrated hulls. The comm chatter instantly identified them, the Black Lance. Astrid's heart threatened to stop. They had heard rumors, but seeing the largest Dominion warships materialize was something else entirely. Admiral O'Reilly quickly ordered all functional ships to formation, ready for one final stand if necessary. The Black Lance frigates wasted no time unleashing their advanced weaponry. Waves of compressive plasma soared across the void, crumpling a smaller Allied frigate in a single shot. In the face of such onslaught, the Earth-led fleet, battered by the rescue, stood at a painful disadvantage. Yet pulling out now would mean letting the Dominion retake or kill the newly freed captives. Despite exhaustion, O'Reilly and Astrid found themselves exchanging grim nods over the comm. Retreat meant conceding everything they had just saved. All ships, hold the line. O'Reilly's voice resonated with the gritty determination of a man who refused to let fear prevail. The final engagement roared to life. Through the swirling debris and leftover wreckage from the ring, Earth and Allied ships fought back. They fired coil cannons, missiles, and railguns into the advancing Black Lance. The Dominion's wedge-like cruisers hammered them in return, monstrous cannons lighting up the starfield. The void became a flicker of explosions and dying embers. Damage reports came in nonstop. The Allied vessels formed a protective arc around the clusters of rescue transports, shielding them with their own hulls. In the thick of it, the ESS Oppenheimer lunged forward, launching concentrated torpedo volleys that caught a Dominion dreadnought at a vulnerable angle. The dreadnought's armor crumpled, internal systems igniting in chain reaction. A silent inferno ballooned from the hull. That show of defiance invigorated the Allied side, proving the Black Lance could bleed. Then two Dominion capital ships positioned themselves to flank the Earth flagship. Astrid saw it happen on the sensors. The Oppenheimer was pinned, energy readings spiking as the enemy prepared a devastating crossfire. Without hesitation, she steered the Resolution directly into the line of fire. The cruiser lurched, absorbing crippling blasts that tore through part of its plating. Painful jolts knocked crew members off their feet. Alarms shrilled in a deafening chorus. Yet that sacrificial maneuver spared the Oppenheimer a lethal hit, allowing it time to pivot and return fire with everything it had. One Dominion capital ship's reactor overloaded, ripping it apart in a cataclysm of metal fragments. Across the formation, Earth and its allies inflicted more casualties on the Dominion. The remainder of the Black Lance wavered. The unexpected ferocity and moral resolve of the humans was not what they had anticipated. Dominion star charts had labeled Earth as an inward-looking power, still healing from old wounds. They did not anticipate how quickly Earth would risk everything for the sake of strangers crying out in the darkness. Finally, the Dominion ships began to retreat. Some vanished into jump signatures. Others remained adrift, broken. The battered Allied fleet offered no pursuit. They could scarcely keep themselves intact. Smoke and sparks twisted through airless corridors in multiple ships, but the rescued families were safe for another day. In the aftermath, Colonel Astrid Nova collapsed against a bulkhead, physically and mentally spent. Iden was at her side, also haggard, but sporting a faint grin. They had done it. They had faced down an empire that believed itself unstoppable. They had answered the call no one else would. Even if this war did not end here, the Dominion knew from this day on that humanity was not idle, not content to let genocide go unanswered. Once the immediate crises were contained, Earth and Allied ships began methodically towing damaged vessels to a rendezvous point. The newly liberated aliens, Hestara, Dreen, Aurelian, and more, were given medical attention. Some stared at the humans with wonder, whispering about how rumors had claimed Earth was too self-absorbed to care. Others bowed in gratitude. Astrid tried to assure them that they deserved peace, and that Earth was only doing what any species with conscience should. Meanwhile, on Earth, the news of the victory, as narrow as it was, spread like wildfire. The Senate found itself confronted by an ecstatic public praising the bravery of the expedition. Civilian recruit centers overflowed with volunteers, drawn by the stories of rescuing children from certain death. For the first time in years, humanity felt united by a cause beyond itself. Chancellor Ava Leong delivered a broadcast that reached across Earth's orbital stations and out toward Allied worlds. Her tone was calm, but carried steel in every word. She recounted how Colonel Nova and Admiral Aureli's teams had liberated thousands, how they had proven that humanity would not remain silent in the face of evil. She warned the Dominion that if they continued their path of conquest, they would face not just Earth, but the collective might of every species willing to stand up for life. She ended with a promise that Earth would work with the Council of other races to track down Dominion bases and keep the galaxy safe. Colonel Astrid Nova, though never one for pomp, received more messages of thanks than she could handle. The refugees aboard the Resolution were eventually transferred to safer vessels or Allied outposts. She wandered her corridors in a daze, seeing new scorched bulkheads that told the story of the final battle. She recognized that the conflict was only beginning. The Dominion might come back with bigger fleets, or the dreaded Black Lance might regroup. But at least now, the galaxy knew humanity was not asleep. They had rejoined the stage, but this time with a moral vow to protect those who had nowhere else to turn. In the days that followed, joint task forces began forming under an expanded alliance. Diplomatic lines opened between Earth and multiple alien governments alarmed by the Dominion's aggression. Shared intelligence revealed further hidden bases. Even though the future was uncertain, the shift was unmistakable, from scattered, fearful inaction to a determined front prepared to check the Dominion. Near the final docking cradle of the ISV Resolution, Iden stood with a data slate, finalizing calculations for a new scouting route. Astrid approached him, still bandaged from shoulder wounds sustained in the ring station's firefight. She asked him how he felt about the possibility of returning to the front. He looked at her with unwavering resolve. "We can't stop now," he said. "Too many are still out there, crying for help. If we don't answer, who will?" She nodded, stifling a sigh. Her injuries ached, but it was a small price. After a moment of gazing through the porthole at the star-flecked void, she replied, "Then we keep going. We've seen enough to know that waiting for someone else is never the answer." The knowledge that more battles lay ahead did not diminish the significance of what had been accomplished. For those thousands who had been mere hours away from annihilation, the arrival of Earth's warships and the sight of uniformed human marines breaking down cell doors felt like the first rays of sunrise after a lifetime of night. In a makeshift chapel aboard an Allied vessel, an Aurelian father prayed in luminous whispers, offering thanks to the skylines of Earth who shielded them. A Dreen mother cradled her child, telling stories of how humans were rumored to be cunning but distant, yet when the moment came, they had fought like guardians. Rumors, once steeped in cynicism, transformed into legends of courage. On the battered bridge of the ESS Oppenheimer, Admiral Aureli methodically planned the next operation with the Council's representatives. Even they seemed astonished at the speed of Earth's return. More so, they were stunned by the moral determination that drove Earth's cause. The Dominion had not been destroyed, but it had been wounded badly, left reeling from an unexpected blow. The difference was that now, the rest of the galaxy saw that humanity, once in retreat, had rediscovered its will to stand for more than just itself. And so the message spread beyond the charred axis, beyond the smoldering remains of the Dominion ring. Those who once wept in isolation now found reason to hope, and they repeated it among their communities. We were forsaken, but the humans came. They risked everything for strangers. They heard us when no one else did. Colonel Astronova, in one final reflection as she prepared her next mission docket, thought of how everything had started with a faint distress signal in the cosmic night, how a single call for help carried them past the boundaries of Earth's caution. Strangely, she felt no regret. If anything, she was certain that no matter how many Dominion ships prowl the darkness, humanity would continue to answer the calls that the galaxy's forgotten souls sent out. The cost might be high, but the cause was beyond measure. The cost was never too high when innocent lives hung in the balance. That was the truth that guided her, and now guided an entire civilization that had rediscovered its conscience. In the swirling depths of space, hope was reborn among countless refugees who had once believed themselves alone. Earth had come for them, bridging silence and despair with the roar of engines and the flash of coil guns. The galaxy would remember that day for generations, the day they cried out for help, only to find that it was humanity above all others who had finally answered the call.